What is economics? Economics has been defined as a study of the distribution of scarce resources. You note that we have a subtitle called We Never Have Enough. What we mean by this is the problem in society is we have a paradox. We have limited resources, which we will discuss later, and we have unlimited ones. Therefore, as a society and as individuals, we must make decisions on how to distribute our resources. As individuals, our resources are pretty much our income. Obviously, we have to take that income and distribute it across all the things we want because those wants are unlimited. So when we talk about economics, we're really talking about the study of the distribution of scarce resources and how best to distribute those. In this course, we'll spend a lot of time and discuss a lot of details on how we distribute scarce resources. What do we mean by the economic perspective? Well, every field of study has a certain perspective and certain assumptions related to it. If you're a sociologist or a chemist or a physicist or a historian, you'd have a certain perspective, and it would probably be somewhat different than the economist. So what are our economic perspectives? Well, first of all, we assume resources are scarce, which we have stated, and that wants are unlimited. Thus, we have to make choices. We can't have everything. We can't have it all. We also assume that our behavior is purposeful. In other words, we don't just randomly consume goods for no good reason. We have some methodical way of choosing the goods that we want to consume and those that we value the most. What we then do is we look at a good and we look at its cost and then we look at its benefits. Those benefits are subjective. It's going to differ from individual to individual. Costs are real, but the cost for one person may seem greater than the cost for another person. For instance, let's assume you want to buy a gallon of milk. You look at the gallon of milk and you say, okay, what kind of benefits am I going to receive from this? And obviously, if you have children at home who want cereal with milk, you're going to put a fairly high benefit on that. You then look at the cost. Let's assume that's $2.50, and you decide, is the benefit going to exceed the cost, or is the cost going to exceed the benefit? If you like milk, if you think it's good for you, or your members of your family, you've probably decided the benefits are going to exceed the cost, and you're going to purchase it. On the other hand, you look at it and you say, gee, I'm lactose intolerant. I really don't think milk's good for me. I'm not going to purchase it. So what we do is when we choose those outcomes where the benefits exceed the costs. And when we do that in a purposeful way, we're going to maximize our benefits over our costs. In the case of the milk, what kind of a value do we put on it? Well, maybe you put a $5 value on it, even though you only have to pay $2.50. On the other hand, somebody else might only put a value of 50 cents, and it's going to be $2.50, so they won't purchase it. So that's what we mean by the economic perspective. In economics, we try to use what we call the scientific method. What is the scientific method? Well, the scientific method, especially in the social science like economics, indicates that first we observe behavior. Economists are great at observing behavior, and that's the reason we end up with many of the ideas we do. And in fact, a big area of economics today is behavioral economics. We look at people, we say, how are they responding and how are they acting in certain situations? We then formulate a cause and effect. This is kind of a theory. In other words, why are they operating that way? Why are they behaving that way? What has caused them to do that, and what is the effect of that outcome? And one of the most difficult things is to determine the cause and the effect. In economics, many people confuse those and don't understand the difference between cause and effect, and they get those reversed. We then test outcomes. What we mean by that is we either gather some data or we make some observations and we test our hypothesis or our theory or idea. And then we accept, reject, or modify that hypothesis. If our theory doesn't fit what we observe, then obviously we have to reject it or modify it. If it does, then we accept it. And even though we have now developed a hypothesis that seems to be acceptable, we're going to continue to test. One of the most important aspects of any kind of science is that our studies, our observations have to be reproducible. All studies have to be reproducible. That's the reason you can't look at one study and conclude that that is telling us the truth, because those observations, those theories may not be reproducible. We find this a lot anymore, and until we've had many, many, many studies, we can't really be sure of much of anything. Some important details for this course and the way we're going to approach it. First of all, economics makes lots of generalizations. For instance, one of the first things we'll run into is the supply and demand. And we will say when price goes up, people tend to buy less. That is a generalization. Occasionally somebody will come up with an example where that's not true, but again, in most cases it really is, or there's another reason that has occurred. We also assume that other things are equal. In other words, nothing else has changed except that. For instance, again, as we go back to demand, we're assuming when the price goes up and people buy less, nothing else has changed, and we'll discuss that later. We also love to use graphs. I know that troubles a lot of students who are weak in math, but the reason we do it is it's a nice shorthand method and it gives us a picture. Trying to do it verbally with lots and lots of explanation does two things. Number one, it takes a lot more words, and number two, it actually creates great confusion many times. Graphical expressions are very, very useful, and as you get into the world, if you haven't already, you'll find that companies use these a lot. I mean, pictures showing or graphs showing profits rising or revenues rising or something like that. Why? Because we can look at it and know exactly what we're talking about. We also are going to use what we call positive economics. Positive economics, it means that we have actually proven something. Again, I go back to what I stated a few minutes ago, the law of demand. We have studied and studied and studied this, and generally we believe and we find that as prices go up, people tend to buy less of something. That is not a value judgment. It's a statement of provable fact that can be studied. Normative economics has a value assigned to it. Economists aren't particularly good at dealing with normative situations. They really can't tell you what you should do. They can only really determine how you ought to do it best, or what it's going to cost you, or what the benefits are. So what do we mean by normative economics in an example? Politicians work in the normative world an awfully lot. So when somebody says we need more national defense, that's a normative statement. I can't prove that. Even though we took a vote of everybody and they all agreed, that really doesn't prove it. It just simply says we agree. That is normative. In other words, there is a value judgment associated with it. That's the reason we have people with differing opinions in politics. For instance, we may say we need more health care. That's a normative statement. Do we need more health care? Can't prove it. As an economist, you can't ask me whether we need more health care or more defense. What you can ask me is what is going to be the best way to provide that to individuals or society as a whole. Also in this course we're studying macroeconomics. The other course is microeconomics. And this should be somewhat self-explanatory. Macro is big, micro is small. Microeconomics deals with the individual and the individual firm. Macroeconomics deals with the entire society combined. So macroeconomics is what we study in this course, even though the first few chapters we're discussing are common to both courses, because it's important to understand those issues and those concepts before we get into the macro discussion. What do we mean by the personal economizing problem? Because that's where we start. We are going to talk about society as a whole, but we really need to think about ourselves first. In other words, if we understand how we work, well, you'll really understand better how our economy works in general. The personal economizing problem, there are several issues. One is you have limited income. That's that limited resource thing. So you have a certain amount of income. Some people are going to have more than others. But it is limited no matter how large it is. You then have unlimited wants. Well, we've already discussed that quite a lot. And no matter what, you can always come up with something else you'd like to have. The problem is your income restricts your budget. In other words, you're only going to have a certain amount of money to spend, and that provides you a budget restriction. So for instance, let's say I have an income of $1,000 a week. That's my budget restriction. Now obviously I could go out and borrow money, but what I'm really doing is I'm just rearranging my consumption. For instance, if I borrow money today to buy something today, I'm going to have to pay that money back, and it's going to restrict my budget in the future. So we can move consumption between time periods, but it really doesn't eliminate the issue of the economizing problem. We also have trade-offs and opportunity cost. Opportunity cost is something we'll discuss in more detail shortly because it's extremely important. Trade-offs and opportunity costs are pretty much the same thing. In other words, if I buy one good, I can't buy another good. So I've gone to the movie, I've spent the money, and now I don't have money to go out to eat. That's an opportunity cost or a trade-off. The other is, finally, that incomes do change. As incomes change, our budget's going to change. We're going to have more money to spend. We still have limited income, even though I have more income, and we can fulfill more wants, even though they are still unlimited. So incomes do change. What about society? Well, society has a similar situation as the individual, but we have to look at it slightly differently. As we pointed out, society has scarce resources. What do we mean by that? What we mean by resources are generally four types: land, labor, capital, and entrepreneurial ability. Land is land plus anything that comes from the land. So we're talking about agriculture, yes, but we're also talking about minerals, we're talking about oil, we're talking about iron ore, we're talking about anything from the land. Labor is exactly that. It's people working. Obviously, they can work at different things, but labor is a scarce resource. Even though I have well over 300 million people, it is scarce. Now, some people might say, well, yes, but there's unemployment, which implies that that's not scarce. Yeah, it still is scarce. Scarcity means that you can't get all you want at a zero price. So even though there is unemployment, you probably still can't hire people at a zero price, and get all the workers you want. So that's really what we mean by scarce. There's also capital. Capital is basically the means of production. It's machines, it's equipment, it's buildings, those things that we use, in fact, to make goods and services. And finally, entrepreneurial ability is the fourth one. For many years, we actually didn't include this one because we didn't think of it as distinctly different from the other three, but in fact they are. Some people in the past used to call it management, but entrepreneurs are a unique class because they take land, labor, capital, and they take their abilities and their imagination and they arrange those three to produce goods and services, and they either do it cheaper or they provide new goods and services. For instance, many years ago, somebody made and sold a pet rock. Sold about $10 million worth. You can't tell me there weren't rocks before, but he was creative enough to understand at that time that this might sell. By the way, he tried other things later similar to that and they failed. So timing was everything. Again, we have unlimited wants. Sit down and think about what you'd like to have, and no matter what it is, you'll be able to come up with something else. Also, you're going to be alive. If you're going to be alive tomorrow, you ate today, you're going to eat tomorrow. So that's an unlimited want. How do we develop a model of scarcity? Well, we use something called a production possibility table. The production possibility table is a mathematical representation of scarcity. It assumes we can produce only two goods, example, public goods and private goods. We then assume all resources are employed as efficiently as possible. So here you have a production possibility table. This table shows the combinations of two goods that can be produced, again using all your resources as efficiently as possible. And you can either produce 10A and 0B, or 9A and 1B, or 7A and 2B, or 4A and 3B, and 0A and 4B. You know two things. As you produce more of one good, the production of the other good falls, since you must take resources from one good to the other good. You also notice that you must sacrifice increasing amounts of one good to get an additional unit of the other good. When you go from 0B to 1B, you must give up 1A. When you go from 1B to 2B, you must give up 2A. When you go from 2B to 3B, you must give up 3A, and when you go from 3B to 4B, you must give up 4A. The amount you must sacrifice is called the opportunity cost, and it is increasing as we move from the production of one good to the other. This is due to, if we graph the combination shown in the production possibility table, the graph is going to look something like this. This is called the production possibility curve. It is bowed out from the origin because it is an increasing opportunity cost table. In other words, we have opportunity costs, but you notice when we calculated the opportunity cost, it became more expensive or more costly, and we had to give up more as we produce more of the other good. Any point on the curve will show the possible outputs at full employment. If we move along the curve, we will see we can only obtain more of one good by giving up some of the other good. You'll also note there's a dot inside the curve. This indicates underemployment or inefficiency in the economy. At this point, we can increase the production of one or both goods at the same time. This is because we would have resources not being used that could be put into production. There's also a point outside the curve, but this is unattainable at this time. We do not have enough resources to produce that quantity of goods. Over the long run, we may be able to because the curve will move out as we increase resources. This is called growth, and with growth, you'll be able to produce more in the future to fulfill wants. What are the reasons for growth? Well, your book will give you a very long list, but they really come down to two things. The two reasons that the economy will grow, and they are very simple. You either have more resources or you have better resources. More resources would be more land, more labor, more capital, or more entrepreneurial ability. Obviously, what determines labor is the population. We have well over 300 million people, but that can increase, and immigration has increased it over the years, as well as birth rates. In some societies today, we're actually seeing declines in population, which means they have less labor. The other is better resources. Now, many of these things may not increase and they may not change, but they may become better. One of the reasons we educate people is to make them a better resource. Labor is better as it becomes better educated and learns how to use their skills better. Land, even though it will not change, can become better. For instance, in agriculture today, we can produce a lot more per acre of land than we ever could in the past. In the oil area, we have developed new ways to get oil and natural gas out of the ground, which means that we get better production. So in both of these cases, any of these will move the curve out to the right. And that is either because we have more resources or we have better resources. With international trade, there's one final qualification or discussion. We have considered a single economy, but what happens when you have several economies that produce and trade? The long and short is that by combining the production possibilities to two economies, you can obtain more output than the two could produce separately. It also tends to flatten